At 1700 hours on the 5th of November, 1940, Captain Edward Stephen Fogarty Fagan raised his binoculars toward an unknown warship 8 miles distant on the northern horizon. The seas were heavy. Darkness approached. Convoy HX-84. 37 merchant ships carrying 225,728 gross tons of food, fuel, steel, and machinery from Halifax to Britain steamed eastward in 9 columns. Fagan commanded HMS Jervis Bay, a 14,000-ton armed merchant cruiser, former passenger liner converted to warship, armed with 7 obsolete 6-inch guns designed in 1905. The unknown ship turned broadside. 6 flashes of light erupted from her hull. The sound arrived seconds later. Express trains overhead. 6 11-inch shells screaming past. Fagan knew immediately what he faced. A pocket battleship, Deutschland class, 350mm guns that could penetrate 8 inches of armor at 20,000 yards, against his 127mm pop guns effective to perhaps 12,000 yards on a good day with favorable weather and competent fire control, none of which applied now. He gave 3 orders. Signal the convoy to scatter. Lay smoke floats, full ahead toward the enemy. Jervis Bay, maximum speed 17 knots on her best day, which this was not, turn toward Admiral Scheer. Maximum speed 28.3 knots. Displacement 15,420 tons full load. Armor belt 80mm. 6 11-inch guns. 8 5.9-inch guns. A modern fire control system with optical rangefinders. And a crew trained to use them. The mathematics were absolute. Scheer could stand off at 20,000 yards and methodically destroy every gun on Jervis Bay before a single British shell reached her, or she could close and finish it in minutes. The third salvo struck Jervis Bay amidships at 1707 hours. The foremast collapsed. The director and rangefinder disintegrated. The transmitting station controlling the guns was obliterated. Electrical cables severed. The guns switched to primitive manual control, each turret operating independently. No central fire direction. No effective way to concentrate fire or correct ranging errors. The fourth salvo hit the bridge. Captain Fagan lost his right arm below the elbow. He remained standing, clutching the stump, blood streaming, giving orders. Most of the bridge crew died around him. For 22 minutes, Jervis Bay burned toward Admiral Scheer. This was not a battle. This was a delay. Every minute Jervis Bay held German attention was 1 minute for 37 merchant ships to disappear into gathering darkness. Fagan knew this. His crew knew this. They kept firing. Shells fell short. Every shot. The range was too great. The fire control was wrecked. The guns elevated to maximum, but the shells struck water 2,000 yards from target. Still they fired, because stopping meant the German ship would turn to the convoy immediately. At 1729 hours, a shell detonated in Jervis Bay's forward magazine. The explosion tore through the hull. Fires spread uncontrolled. The order came to abandon ship. Men jumped into November North Atlantic water, 4 degrees Celsius. Survival time measured in minutes. Fagan was last seen on the tilting bridge, one-armed, still standing. Jervis Bay capsized and sank bow first at approximately 1740 hours. 190 men died. 65 survived. Pulled from the water by Swedish freighter Stureholm, Captain Fagan's body was never recovered. He received the Victoria Cross posthumously. The citation stated he had held the Germans' fire for nearly an hour. This was generous, 22 minutes. But 22 minutes was enough. Admiral Scheer had spent 335 11-inch shells destroying Jervis Bay. 22 minutes, during which 37 merchant ships scattered. By the time Kapitän zur See Theodor Kranke turned his ship toward the convoy, darkness had fallen and the targets had dispersed across 60 square miles of ocean. His Arado seaplane could not fly in darkness. His radar could track individual ships but not guide guns to them effectively in heavy seas. He pursued throughout the night. He found and sank 5 merchantmen. 32 escaped. The convoy had been saved by an obsolete armed merchant cruiser that should never have been in that position, commanded by a captain who made the only decision honor permitted. This was the pocket battleship concept, operating exactly as designed. Hunt convoys, destroy escorts, sink merchant tonnage, evade pursuit. The question was how Germany had built such a ship at all, given the restrictions imposed after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed the 28th of June, 1919, limited Germany's post-war navy to 6 pre-dreadnought battleships, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. No submarines, no aircraft carriers. Existing ships could be replaced after 20 years' service. New battleships could not exceed 10,000 long tons, standard displacement. Gun caliber was not explicitly restricted by the treaty itself, though the Naval Inter-Allied Commission of Control, created by the treaty, did have authority to regulate armament. This created an interesting problem. France and Poland remained potential enemies. The Soviet Union was unpredictable. Any naval conflict would require ships capable of contesting control of the Baltic Sea and breaking into the Atlantic to threaten commerce. But 10,000 tons severely constrained what could be built. A conventional battleship of 35,000 tons carried 9 15-inch guns, armor sufficient to resist 15-inch shells, speed approaching 30 knots, and cruising range adequate for Atlantic operations. Strip 25,000 tons from that design, and something had to give. The Reichsmarine made its choice. Sacrifice armor, sacrifice speed, retain firepower, maximize range, build commerce raiders that could outgun any cruiser and outrun any battleship. The Washington Naval Treaty, signed in 1922, limited other powers to battleships of 35,000 tons with 16-inch guns maximum. Britain, France, the United States, Japan, all built to these limits. Germany, excluded from Washington, faced much harsher restrictions under Versailles. The German designers turned restriction into opportunity. Build what the treaty permitted, make it lethal to merchant ships, make it survivable against cruisers, make it fast enough to escape battleships. This was the pocket battleship concept. Design work began in 1924. Gerät 1A emerged from the Naval Construction Office in Berlin. Displacement, 19,000 tons. 6 14-inch guns in 2 triple turrets. Armor belt, 220 millimeters. Speed, 18.5 knots. This was rejected. Too slow. Inadequate range. The whole point was commerce raiding. 18 knots could not escape pursuit. Subsequent designs explored various combinations of armament, protection, speed, and displacement. By 1928, the final configuration emerged. Deutschland class. Officially 10,000 long tons, standard displacement. Actually 11,550 long tons for Admiral Scheer. The second ship, 12,340 for Admiral Graf Spee. The third, the ships violated the treaty by 15 to 23%. Germany announced compliance. Nobody believed it. Nobody could prove otherwise without access to German shipyards. The design incorporated revolutionary features. Welding instead of riveting for 90% of the hull, saving 15% weight compared to conventional construction. This allowed heavier armament and armor within displacement limits. All-diesel propulsion instead of steam turbines. 8. MAN 9 cylinder double, acting 2-stroke diesel engines, developing 54,000 shaft horsepower. This gave Admiral Scheer maximum speed 28.3 knots and cruising range 9,100 nautical miles at 20 knots. No contemporary cruiser could match that endurance. A raider that could steam from Germany to the South Atlantic, operate for months, and return without refueling at a port was a strategic weapon. The main armament consisted of 6 280mm SKC 28 guns in 2 triple turrets, 1 forward, 1 aft. These were 52 caliber weapons, barrel length 14.56 meters. The 885 kilogram armor-piercing shell left the muzzle at 910 meters per second. Maximum range at 40 degrees elevation was 36,475 meters. The gun could penetrate 80 millimeters of vertical armor at 30,000 meters, 200 millimeters at 16,000 meters. Against cruisers with armor belts of 76 to 127 millimeters, this was devastating. The rate of fire was 3 rounds per minute, slower than British or American weapons but adequate for the intended role. Secondary armament comprised 8 150mm SKC 28 guns in single turrets amidships, 4 per side. These 55 caliber weapons fired a 45.3 kilogram high explosive shell to 24,600 meters maximum range, effective against destroyers and merchant ships. Anti-aircraft armament initially consisted of 388mm SKL 45 guns, These were replaced in 1935 with 6 88mm SKC 31 guns in 3 twin mounts. Admiral Scheer, built later, received the twin mounts during construction. By 1940, she carried 6 105mm L65 guns in 3 twin mounts, 8 37mm SKC 30 guns in 4 twin mounts, and 10 20mm flak guns. By 1945, the light anti-aircraft battery had grown to 6 40mm guns, 8 37mm guns, and 33 20mm guns. The armor scheme reflected the design philosophy: protect vitals, accept vulnerability everywhere else. The main belt was 80mm of cemented armor inclined at 15 degrees to give effectively 110mm against horizontal fire. Forward and aft of this belt, protection dropped to 60mm, then 30mm, then 18mm at bow and stern. The deck armor ranged from 17 to 45mm. The torpedo bulkhead was 40mm, turret faces 140mm, barbettes 125mm, conning tower 140mm vertical, 100mm roof. This was adequate against 6-inch shells. It was marginal against 8-inch shells. It was worthless against 15-inch shells. The ship was designed to avoid 15-inch guns entirely. Admiral Scheer was ordered by the Reichsmarine from the Reichsmarine Werft shipyard in Wilhelmshaven. Laid down 25th of June, 1931. Launched 1st of April, 1933. Commissioned 12th of November, 1934. Kapitän zur See, Wilhelm Marschall took command. Length, overall, 187.90 meters after clipper bow installed in 1940. Beam, 21.34 meters. Draft, 7.25 seaters full load. Standard displacement, officially 10,000 long tons. Actually 13,660 long tons. Full load displacement, 15,180 long tons. Complement 33 officers and 586 enlisted men as designed. Increased to 30 officers and 921 to 1,040 sailors after 1935. The ship spent 1935 through 1936 on training cruises and showing the flag. She visited Madeira in October 1935. She cruised through the Skagerrak and English Channel into the Irish Sea in summer 1936. Then came Spain. The Spanish Civil War began in July 1936. Germany supported the nationalists. The Soviet Union supported the Republicans. Germany sent observers, weapons, and air units. The Kriegsmarine sent ships on non-intervention patrol, officially to prevent weapons reaching either side, actually to protect German weapon shipments to Franco and document Soviet weapon shipments to the Republicans. Admiral Scheer deployed to Spanish waters in August 1936. 4 tours through June 1937. On the 29th of May 1937, Spanish Republican aircraft attacked Deutschland off Ibiza. Bombs killed 31 crew, wounded 83. Admiral Scheer was ordered to retaliate. On the 31st of May 1937, Admiral Scheer arrived off Almeria at 07:29 hours. The anniversary of the Battle of Jutland, she flew the Imperial War flag. Kapitän zur See Otto Zieliaks, who had replaced Marshall, opened fire on shore batteries, naval installations, and ships in the Republican-held harbor. The bombardment lasted approximately 20 minutes. 200 rounds expended. Casualties were never accurately determined. Estimates ranged from 19 to 200 dead. The mission was political theater. Message sent. Message received. Admiral Scheer returned to Germany. When war began on the 3rd of September, 1939, Admiral Scheer was not ready. She had been in refit at Wilhelmshaven since late 1938. Work continued through summer 1939. The outbreak of hostilities accelerated completion. Radar was installed, Fumo 22 in 1940, upgraded to 2 Fumo 26 sets in 1942. The tower bridge structure was removed and replaced with a lighter tubular structure similar to her sister Lützow, renamed from Deutschland. The bow was rebuilt with increased rake. A large funnel cap was added. Twin 20mm mounts were installed. She was ready for operations by September 1940. The orders were explicit: break into the Atlantic, attack the Halifax convoy route, sink merchant tonnage, avoid engagement with equal or superior force, evade detection as long as possible, strike suddenly, disappear. This was commerce raiding doctrine perfected by the auxiliary cruisers already operating in distant waters. Admiral Scheer would bring heavier firepower and greater survivability to the mission. On the 27th of October, 1940, under command of Kapitän zur See Theodor Kranke, Admiral Scheer departed Kiel. Brief stop at Stavanger, Norway. Then, north through the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland on the night of the 31st of October. The breakthrough was undetected. Waves reached 100 feet during a hurricane. 2 crewmen were washed overboard. The sick bay, filled with injured. Unsecured equipment ricocheted off bulkheads. Seawater damaged food supplies through open ventilators. The captain and helmsman were thrown into a corner of the bridge. Admiral Scheer survived and entered the Atlantic. Radio silence was broken briefly at 23:16 hours on the 1st of November to report crossing 60 degrees north latitude. From leaving home waters, the ship had remained unobserved from land. Sea, or air. The planned patrol area lay between 53 degrees 40 minutes north, 35 degrees west, and 50 degrees north, 36 degrees west, with a return leg to 52 degrees north, 38 degrees west. This, roughly 120 by 120 square mile area, was where German naval operations staff believed most Halifax convoys passed between the 4th and 6th of November. Intelligence on these convoys consisted only of departure dates and estimated speed. There was no aerial reconnaissance. Finding a convoy in that area without air support was improbable. Kranke had to search methodically and hope. On the 3rd of November, Admiral Scheer reached the patrol area. Heavy seas prevented launching the Arado seaplane. The ship steamed search patterns through the 4th. On the morning of the 5th, weather improved. At 0940 hours, the Arado launched for a sweep 100 nautical miles wide, 70 nautical miles deep. The aircraft found convoy HX-84 at approximately 1500 hours. At 1655 hours, Admiral Scheer's lookouts spotted masts on the southern horizon. The convoy. Kranke approached cautiously. The unknown warship ahead might be an escort. Initial identification suggested an R-class battleship. Closer inspection revealed an armed merchant cruiser. Old passenger liner. No threat. The convoy was defenseless. Except it was not defenseless. It had Captain Fagan. After Jervis Bay sank, after Kranke turned to pursue the scattered convoy. The hunt lasted through the night. At 2100 hours, Admiral Scheer found SS Mopan, 5,389 gross tons, steaming alone. Sank her with gunfire. Position 52 degrees 48 minutes north, 32 degrees 15 minutes west. The action lasted 20 minutes. Then Scheer found the convoy's scattered remnants. At approximately 2200 hours, she engaged SS Maiden, 7,908 tons. Sunk SS Trewillard, 5,201 tons. Sank SS Kenbane Head, 5,225 tons. Still burning. Still firing back with her deck gun until shells silenced her. Sank SS Beaverford, 10,042 tons. Canadian Pacific cargo liner. Fled south at maximum speed 14 knots. Kranke pursued for hours. Beaverford carried only 2 guns. She fired back whenever Scheer closed. The German captain later praised the courage, but the outcome was inevitable. Beaverford was torpedoed to save ammunition. All hands lost. SS Fresno City, 4,955 tons. Sank. 6 ships destroyed plus Jervis Bay. Total tonnage 58,360. Out of 37 merchant ships in the convoy, 32 survived. Tactically, the raid was successful. Strategically, it was less clear. Germany had sent its second most powerful surface raider into the Atlantic. In the first engagement, she had encountered a defenseless convoy with obsolete escort and sunk 6 merchants. This was adequate but not overwhelming. A submarine wolf pack might have achieved similar results. The question was whether Admiral Scheer could sustain operations without being detected and hunted down by superior British forces. The answer was yes, but barely. After the attack, Kranke turned southeast to evade pursuit. British forces searched intensively through the 25th of February. When it became clear Admiral Scheer had withdrawn from the area, she refueled from supply ship Nordmark on the 16th of November. Position classified. On the 24th of November, she sank British steamer Port Hobart, 7,448 tons. Position 22 degrees 44 minutes north, 58 degrees 21 minutes west. On the 1st of December, British steamer Tribesman, 6,242 tons, position approximately 15 degrees north, 35 degrees west. On the 14th of December, rendezvous with Nordmark again. On the 26th of December, rendezvous with auxiliary cruiser Thor, supply ship Nordmark, and tanker Eurofeld. On the 17th of January 1941, Admiral Scheer captured Norwegian tanker Sandefjord, 8,038 gross tons, prize crew placed aboard, sent to occupied France. On the 20th of January, Dutch steamer Barneveld, 5,597 tons, and British freighter Stanpark, 5,103 tons, both sank. On the 3rd of February, Admiral Scheer passed south of Cape of Good Hope into the Indian Ocean. This was audacious. German surface raiders had operated in the Indian Ocean but never a capital ship. The British had limited forces in the area. Merchant shipping was plentiful and poorly protected. From the 14th to 17th of February, rendezvous with auxiliary cruiser Atlantis, German freighter Tannenfels, and 2 prizes, British freighter Spybank, 5,144 tons, and Norwegian tanker Ketty Bervig, 7,031 tons, position approximately 54 degrees east, 13 degrees south. Admiral Scheer refueled from Ketty Bervig on the 17th. On the 20th of February, British tanker, British Advocate, 6,994 tons, captured east of Zanzibar, Greek freighter Gregorios, 2,546 tons, sank, position approximately 45 degrees east, 10 degrees south. On the 21st of February, Canadian freighter Canadian cruiser, 7,178 tons, sank. This was the high point of the deployment. 12 merchant ships sunk or captured in 4 months, tonnage mounting, British forces searching fruitlessly. But fuel was running low. Machinery needed maintenance. The mission had achieved its objectives. Time to return. On the 2nd of March 1941, Admiral Scheer passed south of Cape of Good Hope back into the Atlantic. She turned north. On the 27th of March, she transited the Denmark Strait on her return journey. British cruisers Fiji and Nigeria were in the area searching for German raiders. Admiral Scheer evaded them. She reached Bergen, Norway, on the 30th of March. Spent 1 day in Grimstad Fjord. Destroyer escort Z-23 and Z-24 joined her for the final leg. She reached Kiel on the 1st of April 1941. In the course of her raiding operation, Admiral Scheer had steamed 46,000 nautical miles, sunk or captured 17 merchant ships for a total of 113,223 gross tons. This made her the most successful German capital ship commerce raider of the entire war. Gross Admiral Erich Raeder personally welcomed the crew home. Kapitän zur Seekranke was promoted. The mission was declared a complete success. Propaganda value was enormous. The Kriegsmarine had demonstrated that surface raiders could still operate effectively despite British naval superiority. But the strategic situation was changing. The loss of Bismarck in May 1941 and the destruction of the German supply ship network in the aftermath forced cancellation of a planned Second Atlantic raid by Admiral Scheer and her sister Lutzow, scheduled for late 1941. Without secure refueling, extended operations became impossible. The Royal Navy was learning. More battleships assigned to convoy escort, better coordination between surface ships and aircraft, improved intelligence from ultra-decrypts. The window for successful commerce raiding was closing. Admiral Scheer's subsequent operations reflected this new reality. From 21 February to 23 February 1942, she transferred to Trondheim with heavy cruiser Prince Eugen and 5 destroyers. British submarine Trident torpedoed Prince Eugen on the 23rd, causing serious damage. In July 1942, Admiral Scheer sortied with Lutzow to intercept Arctic convoy PQ-17. Allied intelligence detected the movement. The convoy scattered preemptively. Aircraft and submarines destroyed 24 of 35 merchant ships, but Admiral Scheer never made contact. The surface raiders had become secondary to air and submarine attacks. On the 25th of August, 1942, Admiral Scheer bombarded the Soviet meteorological station at Cape Zelenaya. On the same day, she encountered and sank Soviet icebreaker Alexander Sibiryakov after a running battle. The icebreaker fought back with her single 45mm gun and 4 machine guns against 6 280mm guns. Hopeless. but the icebreaker transmitted warning signals before being silenced. Convoy RA-47 diverted. Admiral Scheer found nothing. Through late 1942 and 1943, she operated primarily in the Baltic, supporting German ground forces with naval gunfire. Shore bombardment missions required different tactics than commerce raiding. The heavy 11-inch guns proved effective against fortifications, but exposed the ship to shore battery counterfire and air attack. In August 1943, she provided fire support for German forces retreating from the Soviet advance. By 1944, her guns were worn out. Barrel life for the 280mm SK C-28 was approximately 350 rounds. Admiral Scheer had fired well over 2,000 rounds since commissioning. Accuracy had degraded significantly. Range had decreased. Penetration was reduced. The aft turret guns required replacement. Admiral Scheer arrived in Kiel in early 1945 for refit. The aft turret was to be completely overhauled with new gun barrels installed. Work began in March. It would never be completed. By April 1945, Allied forces were closing on Kiel from all directions. The port was a priority target for RAF Bomber Command. Admiral Scheer, immobilized in dry dock with her aft turret dismounted, could not be moved. On the night of the 9th to 10th of April 1945, 300 RAF Lancaster bombers attacked Kiel in Operation Big Kiel. The raid began at 2200 hours. 600 tons of high explosive and incendiary bombs fell on the city. At 2208 hours, bombs struck Admiral Scheer. One penetrated the deck and detonated inside the hull. The blast tore open the starboard side. More bombs followed. Near, misses lifted the ship and dropped her back down onto the dry dock floor. The hull whipped and flexed. Water flooded through open seams. The list to starboard increased. 16 degrees. 28 degrees. Electrical systems failed. Many of the skeleton crew did not hear the abandoned ship order and were trapped below. Fires spread. At approximately 22:45 hours, Admiral Scheer capsized in about 50 feet of water. 15 crewmen died from explosions, fire, asphyxiation, sliding machinery, and drowning. After the war, Allied salvage teams partially dismantled the wreck. The visible portions were cut up for scrap. But the sheer size of the inverted hull made complete salvage uneconomical. In 1948, as Kiel began reconstruction, the inner harbor was filled in with rubble from the bombed city. The Ellerbeck district was built on reclaimed land that included the remains of Admiral Scheer. The ship is still there, buried beneath streets and buildings, a pocket battleship entombed under the city she was built to defend. When we assess Admiral Scheer's impact on the war, the numbers tell one story. 17 merchant ships sunk or captured, 113,223 tons. 198 crewmen killed on HMS Jervis Bay, earning their captain a Victoria Cross. Hundreds more sailors dead on merchant ships. Thousands of tons of cargo sent to the ocean floor. Millions of pounds sterling spent by the Royal Navy hunting one ship that evaded them for 5 months. This represents tangible strategic effect. But there is another story. Admiral Scheer was designed to circumvent treaty restrictions. She violated those restrictions by 15%. Germany claimed 10,000 tons. The actual figure was 13,660 tons standard, 15,180 tons full load. This was fraud. But it was fraud everyone expected and nobody could prove without inspecting German shipyards, which nobody could do without violating German sovereignty, which nobody was prepared to do in 1934. The pocket battleship concept represented brilliant engineering constrained by artificial limits. Welding saved weight. Diesel engines provided unprecedented range. The heavy guns gave firepower equivalent to a treaty cruiser's main battery, but on a ship that could outrun most cruisers and outgun anything fast enough to catch it. This was exactly what commerce raiding required. Find convoys, destroy escorts, sink merchants, evade battleships. Admiral Scheer did all of this successfully for 5 months until change in strategic conditions made further operations too risky. The comparison to other German capital ships is instructive. Bismarck sortied once and was sunk. Tirpitz sortied rarely and was bombed to destruction in a Norwegian fjord. Scharnhorst was sunk at North Cape. Gneisenau was bombed at Brest and decommissioned. Prinz Eugen survived, but accomplished little. Admiral Graf Spee was scuttled after the Battle of the River Plate. Lützow spent most of the war under repair after being torpedoed repeatedly. Admiral Scheer alone conducted a successful extended commerce raid, returned safely, and continued operations for 4 more years. By this measure, she was the most effective capital ship Germany deployed. But effectiveness must be measured against cost. Admiral Scheer cost approximately 85 million Reichsmarks to build. Crew training, maintenance, fuel, ammunition, support ships, all added enormously to that figure. For that investment, Germany got 5 months of successful commerce raiding that sank 17 ships, and 4 years of increasingly marginal operations culminating in shore bombardment missions in the Baltic. This was not an adequate return on investment. The same resources allocated to submarine construction would have produced approximately 40 Type 7 U-boats. Those boats, operating as a wolf pack, would have sunk far more tonnage with far less risk of catastrophic loss. The fundamental problem with the pocket battleship concept was that it solved yesterday's problem. In 1919, when the treaty was written, commerce raiding by surface ships was the primary threat to sea lines of communication. Submarines existed but were relatively primitive. By 1940, submarines had evolved into the decisive weapon in the Atlantic. Surface raiders became increasingly vulnerable to air reconnaissance, radar detection, and concentrated counter-radar operations. Admiral Scheer's successful deployment in 1940 to 1941 occurred before these factors matured. By 1942, conditions had changed. She could not repeat the mission. Her subsequent operations were marginal at best. The human cost is more difficult to assess. 15 German sailors died when Admiral Scheer capsized. 198 British sailors died on Jervis Bay. Hundreds more died on merchant ships. These deaths were direct results of Admiral Scheer's operations. But assigning moral responsibility for wartime casualties is complex. Captain Fagan chose to engage. He knew the mathematics. He accepted the outcome. His crew followed him. This was duty, honor, sacrifice. Kranke followed his orders. He was a professional naval officer executing a legal combat operation against enemy shipping. He praised Fagan's courage after the war. Both men did what their respective codes of conduct demanded. What remains is the question of whether building Admiral Scheer was justified by the results. The answer depends on when you ask. In 1934, when she was commissioned, the pocket battleship concept seemed brilliant. A ship that could threaten British commerce, while remaining within treaty limits, however dubiously interpreted. By 1940, after one successful cruise, the concept still appeared valid. By 1942, when submarines dominated Atlantic warfare and Admiral Scheer was relegated to Arctic operations, the concept was obsolete. By 1945, when she capsized under bomb damage while immobilized in dry dock, the entire strategic premise had collapsed. The treaty she was designed to circumvent had been the Treaty of Versailles, imposed on a defeated Germany to prevent rearmament. Admiral Scheer represented Germany's refusal to accept permanent military impotence. The ship was designed to exploit every loophole in the treaty while technically complying with its terms. Displacement officially 10,000 tons, actually 13,660 tons. Diesel engines because the treaty did not restrict propulsion type. Heavy guns because the treaty did not specify maximum caliber until the Naval Inter-Allied Commission belatedly tried to impose limits. Welding because the treaty regulated displacement, not construction method. Every design choice exploited ambiguity or skirted restrictions. This was the ship that cheated the treaty. But cheating the treaty did not win the war. Germany built 3 pocket battleships. One was scuttled after a single engagement. One spent most of the war under repair. One conducted a successful raid, then spent 4 years in increasingly marginal roles before being bombed and capsized in port. This was not an adequate return on the diplomatic capital expended to circumvent Versailles restrictions, or the industrial resources consumed building the ships, or the trained personnel allocated to crew them. The lesson is that designing weapons to circumvent treaties produces weapons optimized for peacetime restrictions rather than wartime requirements. Admiral Scheer was a brilliant solution to the problem of how to build a powerful warship on 10,000 tons displacement, but the problem she solved was artificial. In actual war, displacement limits became irrelevant. What mattered was combat effectiveness, operational availability, and strategic impact. By these measures, Admiral Scheer was adequate but not exceptional. She accomplished her missions when allowed to operate freely. She became increasingly constrained as Allied countermeasures matured. She ended her service trapped in port providing shore bombardment because no other role remained. Today, 4 survivors potentially remember where Admiral Scheer rests. The ship is buried beneath the Ellebeck district of Kiel. Streets run above her. Buildings stand on what was once harbor bottom. The citizens who live there are unaware that beneath their feet lies 15,000 tons of German naval history. No memorial marks the spot. No plaque explains what happened. The pocket battleship that terrorized Atlantic convoys for 5 months, that sent HMS Jervis Bay and her 198 crewmen to the bottom, that steamed 46,000 miles hunting prey, is forgotten beneath urban development. Perhaps this is fitting. Admiral Scheer was designed to cheat the treaty, to exploit restrictions, to maximize capabilities within artificial constraints. She succeeded at this. But success at gaming treaty restrictions did not translate to success in war. She was a ship designed for a strategic environment that no longer existed by the time she entered combat. She was optimized for commerce raiding at the moment. Submarines made surface raiders obsolete. She represented brilliant engineering applied to an outdated concept. And she ended where most such ships end, at the bottom, in this case, buried under the city that built her. At 1700 hours on the 5th of November, 1940. Captain Fagan turned toward Admiral Scheer, knowing absolutely that his ship would be destroyed. He did it anyway. Because duty demanded it. Because the convoy was his responsibility. Because sometimes mathematics does not matter when honor requires action. Jervis Bay bought 22 minutes with her sacrifice. 32 merchant ships escaped. 198 men died so that thousands of others could live. This is what Admiral Scheer's most famous action accomplished. She sunk 7 ships, including 1 armed merchant cruiser. She demonstrated that treaty circumvention could produce effective weapons. She validated the pocket battleship concept for exactly 1 deployment before changing strategic conditions rendered it obsolete. And she cost Captain Edward Stephen Fogarty Fagan his life and his ship and 197 of his crew. They are remembered. The Jervis Bay Memorial stands at Albuys Point in Hamilton, Bermuda. Another memorial stands at Ross Memorial Park in St. John, New Brunswick. Captain Fagan's Victoria Cross resides in the Imperial War Museum. Admiral Scheer has no memorial. She has no preserved artifacts. She lies buried under German pavement 79 years after capsizing. The ship that cheated the treaty is forgotten, except by historians. The armed merchant cruiser that could not win is remembered because her crew refused to surrender without fighting. This tells you everything about what war values and what history preserves. Not the clever exploitation of treaty loopholes. Not the brilliant engineering that squeezed maximum capability from minimum displacement. Not the successful 5-month deployment that sank 17 ships. What is preserved is courage. What is remembered is sacrifice. What endures is the 22 minutes when an obsolete armed merchant cruiser with 7 obsolete guns charged toward a pocket battleship with 6 11-inch guns and died, buying time for others to escape. That mattered. That will always matter. The mathematics were absolute, but Captain Fagan charged anyway. That is what we remember. That is what deserves remembrance. Admiral Scheer was the ship that cheated the treaty. HMS Jervis Bay was the ship that kept faith. History has rendered its judgment on which was more important.